Have you ever asked yourself the question of why people are drifting away from me? Do you think that it is something that maybe you did? Or do you think it's something that maybe they did? Well, guess what? The answer is actually yes. It is something that you did. And yes, it is something that they did. And we are going to be talking about that today. Welcome, everybody. My name is Justin. I'm so glad that you're here. This is the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast. This is the podcast where we use the philosophy of yoga in a very practical and everyday way, one small step at a time to become happier people. And I am so excited about today's episode, which is part one of a two-part series where we're going to talk about how people either drift away from us or when we start to drift away from other people. And so before we get into that, just remember too that there are links in the description of the episode, whether you're listening to this on YouTube or you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app. There's links in the descriptions where you can come and follow me on Instagram. You can buy me a coffee. You can engage in listener support or even sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Now, as we return to new episodes after this past week of having rewind episodes, which, by the way, the rewind episodes, as you know, if you heard them, were geared also towards other people in our life, relationship stuff. And that's what we've been talking about all month. And we've been talking about doing the hard things when it comes to relationships. And so I've been actually thinking a lot about this topic myself, which is why I wanted to bring these episodes to you. Been thinking about this, and I've also been experiencing it too over the past year or even 2 years. And that's when a lot of friends or other people in your life start to drift away. A lot of changes in who's been around in my life. And maybe that's happening for you too, especially if you're starting to do the work to better yourself, to get your life together, and to start following some type of path. And that's what we talk about on this podcast, right? Walking in purpose, moving towards something that's going to drive us to become happier, more fulfilled people that are full of purpose in our lives. And so, as I mentioned before, this episode is going to be broken up into two parts. It's going to talk about the why people start to drift away. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about the action steps you can take when you feel like this is happening. And I have some really great tools that I'm going to be sharing with you that I have been using myself. So let's really get down to the root of why sometimes we drift away from others and other people drift away from us. And I want to say this too. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing all the time when the drifting starts to happen, even though it doesn't feel good. Trust me, it does not feel good. And if it's happened to you before, you know it does not feel good. So in yoga, when most people think of yoga, they think of the physical practice of yoga, right? Going somewhere, maybe putting a yoga mat down and being able to bend over and touch your toes. And really, that's called asana. And number one, you don't have to touch your toes to do yoga, nor do you have to be flexible to do yoga. So, doing yoga physically builds physical strength, it builds endurance, it builds muscles, it helps with blood oxygenation, it helps reorganize and renourish your dead and scarred tissue inside. It has cardiovascular benefits, it has digestive benefits, on and on. The physical practice is a really great way to treat the body with the respect that it deserves because it is carrying you through this life. But when we're done with the physical practice of yoga, that is when the practice of yoga itself truly begins, which there is more yoga, 95% of it is spent off of your mat. And that 5%, maybe that 1 hour or 2 hours that you're doing during your day or every other day or however long you practice it, that 5% is of course minimal compared to the what you're practicing off your mat, those types of benefits that you'll get. And so that's where we are in this podcast. We talk about the true practice of yoga off the mat. And one of the ways we practice yoga off the mat is a parigraha or non-attachment. Now, a parigraha is a yama, and that yama teaches us something very, very, very important. And it is this: take only what you need, keep what serves you, and let go when the time is right. And I want to dive into those three things I just said in this episode with regards to the friendships and the people that, could drift away from you or you drifting away from them. But before this, here's a slight bit of background context for you. Now, if you're like me, and you used to be someone who got up every day and waited for things to happen to you all the time, and you focused on the negative outcome or the potential for a negative outcome that could cause feelings that you don't like or outcomes that you don't like, then you understand what I'm talking about. You see, this is where our need for control over other people can stem from. We want to manipulate and we want to force things to happen in our relationships because we're afraid of what might happen if we don't, right? And we as humans are afraid of loss, we're afraid of grief, we're afraid of sadness, we're afraid of feeling empty, and we're also afraid of feeling like we don't know where to go. And this is all very, very normal. But there is going to be a day, or this day may have already happened to you, like it did for me, when you realize that you just cannot go on like that anymore. Where you say, I have had enough of this because it is taking a toll on my mental health. And it is only then when you are going to decide that you can start making changes. Now, if other people in your life have not reached that point yet, you can't force them to get to that point. You might be able to inspire them. You might be able to show them some research. You might be able to give them inspiration, but you cannot force someone to make that change until that they have gotten to that realization point. Now, if you decide right now that you're just going to settle for what you have right now that prohibits you from growth or moving closer to your purpose in life, that is actually going to reward you pretty tremendously, then you're just going to stay right where you are in your life and nothing is going to change and there will be no growth. And if you're okay with no growth, you probably shouldn't be listening to this podcast, because on this podcast, we're talking about growing and changing and evolving. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to settle anymore for just the status quo. And you want to know why? I'm going to go back to the day that I realized that I couldn't go on like that anymore. And it was a day where I actually was publicly embarrassed while I was out having coffee with the wrong people. The people who shouldn't have been in my life. But it took that event for it to happen on that day, which has been about 3 years now, that I decided I had to start taking stock of who was in my life and making some serious changes. Now, the reason I bring this up is because, yes, you will have relationships where you might have to pull back or end because you are making a conscious decision to change your life. Your values are changing, so on and so forth. But there's also going to be situations and relationships that sort of follow along after that start to fade away into the sunset. So you might start making changes, and then all of a sudden, you're going to notice other relationships are going to change. That's why at the beginning of this episode, I made a comment about, is this really something you did or is it something someone else did? Well, yeah, you are doing something. You're making a change in your life. And yes, other people are doing things. They're not making changes in their life. Or they might be making changes in their life and you're not making changes in yours. When we come back to that moment where you realize things are not where you want them to be. You're sitting with the wrong people. Things are happening to you in your life every single day. There are still going to be a lot of questions. There's still going to be a lot that you still need to realize. And so if you get to that point and you decide I have to terminate relationships or I have to back away from certain relationships, and you do that, and all of a sudden, all of these other relationships start to fade away, we need to go back to aparigraha, that yama. Now, remember, a yama in yoga is how we conduct ourselves and how we behave in life. And aparigraha means that we must let go. It is truly translated to non-attachment. Now, let's begin with taking only what we need, because I want to talk about those three things that I mentioned earlier about aparigraha. And the first one is taking only what you need. Now, this not only applies to people, but this applies to things as well. So if you take an example, a good example is that you decide that you need to have 7 different dipping sauces for your chicken nuggets. That's what you decided. You need to have ranch, buffalo, barbecue sauce, maybe some ketchup, maybe some honey mustard, maybe some sweet and sour, maybe some actual honey. You have to have all 7 of those to eat your chicken nuggets. Now, when you do this, are you actually practicing aparigraha? In theory, you're not practicing aparigraha because you actually don't need all of those dipping sauces. Now, sure, it's going to taste great with all the different dipping sauces, but how much are you consuming versus how much are you wasting? And yeah, maybe you do eat all 7 of the dipping sauces while you're eating your chicken nuggets. But the truth is, you can pick one sauce and have that today, and then you can have another sauce another day instead of overindulging in a lot of the sauces. You see? But the same goes with relationships. Here is what I mean by that. You don't need to select seven different people to fill voids in your life. There is no magic number for the amount of friends you have to have around you just so that you can feel complete. There's no magic number. Taking what you need means when you have a connection with someone, you are taking the friendships offered to you and you are nurturing and you are honoring them. It could mean that you have 2 friends. It could mean that you have 22 friends, which is fine. But I really want you to look at the friendships you actually need in your life right now. Who do you need and what do you need out of those relationships? Think about that from the core of you, not from your ego, which wants to have too much so that you don't have nothing. Because your ego is afraid of having nothing. So that's why you need 7 different dipping sauces. That's why you might need 7 different friends because you feel like you have to have this insane pool of things to select from. But most humans do need to feel loved, to feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel like they're valued and that their life matters. And that's really important to us. So if someone else sees that in you, fantastic. But if you have that friend that you need in your life so that you can go out and have drinks with, what is that friendship based on? Think about that. Now, this leads us to the second point, keeping what serves us. So, we have talked on here about cleaning, especially in the spring. We did spring cleaning episodes, getting rid of things that don't serve us. There is a big difference here between toxic friendships and friendships that don't serve you anymore. So, examples of toxic friendships would include things like control, demeaning, manipulating, degradation, embarrassment, self serving actions like lying, or even physically dangerous behavior, and emotionally damaging behavior. Like if you have a friend who will not release a toxic relationship that they're in, then guess what that means? Your friend is not going to show up for you like you need them to when that's happening, when you need them to, because they're involved in a toxic relationship. And when your friend is in a toxic place and you're not, well, we can handle that on another episode because that's a whole nother topic. But that kind of toxicity that we're talking about with the degradation and the lying and all of those other things that maybe are crossing your boundaries, that's different than a friendship that doesn't serve you. And a friendship that doesn't serve you can mean that the excitement no longer is there, the desire to reach out isn't there, the desire to know what they're doing isn't there, and so on. And there's a lot of reasons why this can happen. And it has no bearing on something manipulative that you're doing or something manipulative that they're doing. It might just mean that you've moved away from each other. It could mean that you're making changes in your life that your friend is not ready to make, and vice versa. It means you can change jobs, graduating from school, having children, or maybe they have children, marriages, divorces, dealing with grief from death. There are all kinds of reasons why these friendships naturally shift and drift away, but these are just some of the reasons. And when these things happen, it's a very good possibility that you hang on longer than needed because you feel like things might go back to the way that they were. But in reality, we're all changing and our values are going to change. As another example, you may discover that when you quit drinking, this is an example about alcohol consumption. When you quit drinking, there are going to be friends that you are going to lose because the friends that wanted to drink with you are now going to disappear because you don't have any other common ground anymore other than alcohol. And you may not have realized that before, because the things that you were doing before that you were using alcohol to make better, like going to see shows or going out to certain parties or other things, activities, that maybe it was roller skating, maybe it's, and you've had alcohol before that, but you really didn't want to go, then you didn't want to go in the first place. And you didn't want to go with that friend in the first place. All that was there, it was the drinking. And this is really hard. And I know this firsthand. So that's number 2, keeping what serves us. Is the relationship still serving you? And our third and final point, finally, is to talk about letting go when the time is right. Now, remember in a prior episode, we talked about letting people do what they want to do. We talked about this right before the rewind episodes. It was all about letting people just do whatever they want to do because we don't want to stifle people's authenticity or creativity. You also don't want people telling you what to do when it comes to your authenticity, do you? It creates a huge roadblock in your life, doesn't it? I mean, look at the people who have been told that they couldn't do things like vote or marry someone of the same sex or wear certain clothes or color their hair in a certain way. I mean, when that stuff happens, all hell breaks loose, doesn't it? Why? Because it doesn't feel good to be told what to do or what not to do when it stifles your authenticity. But we keep making the mistake of telling everyone around us what to do, how to do it, when to do it, blah, blah, blah. But we can't even get our own butt up in the morning and exercise for 10 minutes, can we? Can you get up when the alarm goes off and get right out of bed? Can you sleep without your phone next to you? But you want to go around telling others what to do and how to do it. You must, if you want to feel like a happier person, be driven by purpose. And that's what it means to let go when the time is right. And I know it sucks because here's the thoughts that go through your mind. Oh my gosh, what happened? We just don't talk anymore. Why? Why don't we talk anymore? Oh, they hate me, don't they? I didn't really do anything, did I? What about, oh gosh, it must have been, they don't talk to me anymore because it must have been like what I said to so-and-so, right? Maybe that got back to them. That's why we don't talk, right? Or I can't believe all the times we shared and now we just don't talk. This is ridiculous. But listen, as we wrap this up, I want to remind you of something. We are only talking about the why here. We aren't talking about specifically what we can do yet, which we'll talk about in the next episode, but reminder to look at the people around you and aparigraha. Number 1, are you in a relationship with someone that fulfills your need for human connection above the surface level? Number 2, are you keeping what is serving you in relationships? And number 3, are you actually ready to let go? Or are you clinging on to something that just might not be there? There are a ton of emotions that flood through when it comes to the hard truth about these kinds of friendships and when they're going to end. But I'm telling you from a ton of experience, the more you let things flow and you take the action steps full of intention, these are action steps that are intention filled, the better you will feel. And we're going to talk more about intention and taking action steps on Thursday. And I will see you then. Okay, one last thing. The content in the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast is not intended as a replacement or a substitution for the advice of any medical professional, like a physician, a psychologist, or a qualified therapist, or any other medical professional. It is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only.